My name is Guadalupe, but here in the small town of San Vicente, in the heart of Veracruz, everyone knows me as Lupe. I never thought that someday I would have to tell this story, and even less that I would be capable of doing what I did. They say a mother's love has no limits, and perhaps that's true. I gave everything, sacrificed my entire life for my daughter Rosalva. However, she betrayed me in a way I never imagined, and that marked the beginning of my worst nightmare. The beginning. San Vicente is a quiet town surrounded by mountains and crystal-clear rivers. I was born and raised here, daughter of Don Andres and Dona Carmen. My mother always repeated that education was the only treasure that no one could take from us. Despite our poverty, she sewed day and night to ensure I had what I needed to attend school. It was her greatest dream to see me become someone important. But my destiny changed dramatically the day I met Martín. Martín was a young man who worked transporting products between nearby towns. He appeared one day with his truck, loading sacks of corn in front of Don Evaristo's store. His presence did not go unnoticed, especially by me. He, with his confident smile and penetrating gaze, seemed to have the world at his feet. I was barely 16 years old and he was 25. Although I knew my family wouldn't approve of our relationship, I let myself get carried away. We met in secret, away from the curious eyes of the town. It wasn't long before my life took an unexpected turn. I discovered I was pregnant. When I told him, he promised he would take responsibility, that he would talk to my parents. But those words turned out to be empty lies. Within a few days, he disappeared. I found out from others that he had left town forever. I felt betrayed and alone, but I had no choice but to face the situation. My parents, although disappointed, didn't abandon me. My mother cried in silence for days while my father barely spoke to me. It was then that Dona Tomasa, a neighbor who ran the only community kitchen in town, offered me a job. There I began to earn a living preparing food for the local children and elderly. Although I worked hard, I managed to continue my studies in a night program. When my daughter was born, I named her Rosalva. She was a calm baby with dark eyes that seemed to observe everything around her with unusual intensity. The neighbor women commented that she was a special child, a prodigy. But I began to notice something strange in her behavior. She never cried like other babies, and often stayed silent, staring fixedly at the shadows in the corners of the room. Strange behaviors. As time passed, Rosalva grew, and those peculiarities became more evident. While other children played and laughed, she preferred to be alone, drawing or writing things I didn't always understand. The teachers said she was extremely intelligent, that she learned to read and write before any other child her age. I tried to feel proud, but there was something that deeply unsettled me. The first incident occurred when Rosalva was 7 years old. One morning, Dona Lydia, one of our neighbors, arrived at my house with her eyes full of tears. Her cat, known throughout the town, had appeared dead under strange circumstances. They had found it in the backyard, mutilated in a way that was chilling just to imagine. Before leaving, Dona Lydia confessed to me, "I saw Rosalva near my house last night." I refused to believe it. How could my daughter, so small and sweet, be responsible for something so macabre? Soon after, several animals disappeared or were found dead in similar circumstances. Every time someone mentioned these events, Rosalva remained impassive, observing everything with those eyes that seemed to have no depth. Her drawings also began to change. They were dark, disturbing, full of distorted figures that seemed to come from nightmares. Despite the signs, I kept refusing to accept that something was wrong with my daughter. But then the most alarming thing happened. At school, a classmate of Rosalva's was found in the bathroom with serious injuries after an argument with her. The principal called me to ask for explanations, but I didn't know what to say. I couldn't accept that my daughter was capable of such violence. It was at that moment that I met Dr. Herrera, a psychologist in the city of Xalapa. I decided to take Rosalva for evaluation. After several sessions, Dr. Herrera explained that my daughter showed serious signs of psychopathy. Lack of empathy, manipulative behavior, and total absence of remorse. She suggested institutionalizing her in a specialized center for children with severe disorders. It was one of the most difficult decisions of my life, but I knew I had no other option. The day I left Rosalva at the San Rafael Institute, I felt a part of my soul break. She, on the other hand, showed no emotion. She stared at me with those empty eyes and said something that chilled my blood. "You're going to regret this, Mom." The Institute years. After institutionalizing Rosalva at the San Rafael Institute, my life became a routine of trips between San Vicente and Jalapa. Every weekend I took the first bus to visit her. Although visits were mandatory according to Dr. Herrera's instructions, I went more out of necessity than obligation. I wanted to believe that I could still help her, that my daughter could change. But each visit only deepened my fear. At the institute, Rosalva seemed to adapt easily. The therapist said she showed progress. She showed interest in painting, participated in activities, and maintained impeccable behavior. However, behind that facade, I knew something wasn't right. Her paintings, although technically perfect, had a darkness that was disturbing. Desolate landscapes, twisted human figures, and animals with expressions of suffering filled the canvases. When I asked about the meaning of her works, she would respond with indifference, "They're just things that come to my mind." As the years passed, the therapists began to notice concerning patterns. Rosalva still showed no empathy toward others, and her gaze, that gaze that seemed to pierce through people, remained just as unsettling. One of the nurses, Dona Laura, took me aside one day to show me something they had found in the institute's supply room. A collection of dead animals, carefully hidden behind some boxes. Despite the strict security measures, Rosalva managed to sneak out at night. No one knew how. Dr. Herrera decided to increase her medication and added more therapy sessions. She assured me that Rosalva was being closely monitored, but I no longer trusted anyone's words. For 3 years, my daughter remained in the institute, and although the medical reports spoke of progress, I couldn't help feeling that the only thing that had changed was her ability to hide who she really was. Finally, Dr. Herrera considered that it was time for Rosalva to return home. "We can't keep her here forever," she told me. "She must learn to coexist in society." Return to San Vicente. We returned to San Vicente when Rosalva was 10 years old. She seemed like a different person, disciplined, reserved, and excellent in her studies. But something in her manner remained cold, calculating. Shortly after her return, I began working at a restaurant called Sabor Es de Veracruz. The community kitchen where I had worked had closed, and this new opportunity allowed me to support us. It was there that I met Alfredo. The manager of the place was a kind man, always attentive, who little by little earned my trust. Despite the wounds that Martín had left in my life, I allowed myself to open up again. Alfredo treated Rosalva as if she were his own daughter, something I deeply appreciated. However, Rosalva didn't seem to share my enthusiasm for the relationship. Although she never said it directly, her questions about Alfredo unsettled me. Where does he live? Why did he get divorced? Does he have children? At first I thought it was simple curiosity, but the tone with which she asked those questions was different, almost predatory. I tried to ignore it, convinced it was just a natural reaction to changes. It was during this time that rumors began circulating in San Vicente. Animals were mysteriously disappearing, and some were found dead in terrifying conditions. At first, no one paid much attention, but then young people from town began to disappear. First it was Raúl, Don Samuel's son, who didn't return after school. Then Marisol, a close neighbor, disappeared. Within months, 5 young people had vanished without a trace. The entire town was in panic. The police from Jalapa got involved, and local authorities organized massive searches. One Sunday morning while the town gathered at church, news arrived that paralyzed everyone. The bodies had been found near an old sugar mill, hidden among the remains of rusty machinery. The scene was indescribable, and the screams of the families echoed throughout the place. During the sermon, I observed Rosalva. She was restless, fidgeting with the rosary my mother had given her. She asked me to return home before Mass ended, saying she felt sick. I accompanied her, but something in her attitude made me feel she was hiding something. That night, I heard the neighbors talking about the bodies found. The way they had been killed left everyone horrified. But what disturbed me most was the feeling that Rosalva knew more than she was saying. After the terrible discovery near the sugar mill, tranquility in San Vicente disappeared completely. No one felt safe, and fear filled the streets. The police intensified their investigations, questioning every neighbor, searching every corner of town. Meanwhile, Rosalva seemed to remain detached from everything. Her days continued filled with studies and reading, and at home she always said she didn't understand why people were so upset. I tried to concentrate on my work at the restaurant, but worry about what was happening wouldn't leave me in peace. Alfredo became my greatest support in those days. His patience and understanding helped me cope with the chaos. Although I never shared with him the concerns I was beginning to have about Rosalva. One day while cleaning her room, I found something that left me breathless. In a corner of her desk, there was a black notebook I had never seen before. When I opened it, my hands trembled. The drawings it contained were dark and disturbing, distorted human figures, scenes of violence, and most unsettling, names written carefully beneath each illustration. I recognized some of those names. They were the names of the young people who had disappeared. I immediately hid the notebook, trying to convince myself that it meant nothing, that it was just a coincidence. But deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore it. That night, Rosalva noticed my unease and asked if something was worrying me. I replied that I was tired from work, but her penetrating gaze made me feel she could read my thoughts. Things intensified when the police began visiting houses in town to ask questions. One day they came to ours. Rosalva was in her room, and I went out to receive them. They asked about our routines, if we had noticed anything strange in recent days. I responded calmly, but the nervousness inside me was uncontrollable. Before leaving, one of the officers mentioned that they had found evidence of strange rituals near where the bodies were, candles, disturbed earth, and symbols that no one could identify. That night, my mind wouldn't stop spinning. The drawings, Rosalva's cold attitude, the disappearances, everything pointed to something I didn't want to accept. However, I had no clear proof, and the idea of confronting her terrified me. A few days later, while working at the restaurant, Alfredo surprised me with a ring. He proposed to me in front of everyone with a smile that lit up the place. I accepted, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. That night when I arrived home, I told Rosalva about the engagement. Her reaction was strange. She showed no joy or interest, just observed me in silence and said, "I hope you know what you're doing, Mom." The confrontation begins. Soon after, Dr. Herrera called me. She had been reviewing some of Rosalva's records and wanted to speak with me. We met in Jalapa, and there she showed me something that chilled my blood. Several books had disappeared from her office, including texts on toxicology and medicinal plants. Although she had no concrete proof, the doctor insinuated that Rosalva might be behind it. "We must remain alert," she warned me. But I, blinded by motherly love, kept making excuses to justify everything. The rumors in town continued to grow. Some neighbors began talking about witchcraft, dark rituals, and curses. They said evil had arrived in San Vicente and no one was safe. Although I tried to ignore these comments, I felt increasingly afraid. One night while examining the black notebook I had hidden, I came across something even more disturbing. A drawing of Alfredo. It was done with chilling details, and beneath it was written a date. That date was the following day. That night I couldn't sleep. The image of Alfredo's drawing and the date written beneath it lodged in my mind like an ominous warning. I got up several times, checking the locks on the house, making sure everything was in order. Rosalva slept peacefully in her room, or at least it seemed that way. But even from the hallway, I could feel an unsettling presence emanating from her room. The next day, I tried to act normally. Alfredo arrived early at the restaurant as always, but I didn't mention what I had found in the notebook. I didn't want to alarm him, not without knowing exactly what that drawing meant. I forced myself to stay busy during the shift, but anxiety was eating away at me. When it was time to close, I insisted on accompanying him to his house. Although he accepted, he looked at me curiously, asking if everything was okay. I just told him I preferred to make sure he was safe. When we arrived at his house, everything seemed normal. Alfredo invited me in, but I refused, telling him I needed to get back early. He insisted I stay for a while but finally respected my decision. I watched him enter his house and only then returned to mine. However, my peace was short-lived. As soon as I crossed the door, I heard footsteps upstairs. Rosalva was home, but the noise didn't seem to come from her room. I went up cautiously, and when I opened the attic door, I found something that left me paralyzed. There was an improvised altar covered with black candles, symbols drawn with ash, and a wooden figure I didn't recognize. On top of the altar was a photo of Alfredo, and next to it, a lock of his hair that had clearly been cut without his consent. I stood motionless, unable to process what I was seeing. I knew I had to do something, but before I could move, I heard Rosalva's voice behind me. "What are you doing here, Mom?" Her tone was cold, but her expression was completely serene, as if she had nothing to hide. I tried to confront her, but my voice barely came out. She simply smiled and asked me not to worry, that everything she did was for our good. "You don't understand, but you will soon," she told me as she calmly extinguished the candles and collected the photos and objects from the altar. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? Talk to Dr. Herrera? Nothing seemed enough to handle what was happening. That night, Alfredo didn't answer my calls. I thought he was just busy, but the unease wouldn't leave me in peace. The next morning, the town woke to another terrifying piece of news. Alfredo had been found dead in his house, under circumstances that left everyone horrified. The police mentioned there were no signs of forced entry or fingerprints pointing to an intruder. Rumors about witchcraft and dark rituals began circulating again. I couldn't deny what I had seen in the attic. I knew Rosalva was involved, but I also knew no one would believe me. How could I accuse my own daughter without concrete proof? I decided to go directly to Dr. Herrera, bringing the black notebook and describing what I had found at home. She listened attentively, but her expression hardened as she read the pages. "This goes beyond what I imagined," she told me. "We must act before it's too late." Dr. Herrera insisted that I take Rosalva back to the institute, but I knew convincing her wouldn't be easy. Rosalva was no longer a helpless child. She had grown, and her intelligence and manipulation were beyond my control. That same night, I found a letter in my room. It was from Rosalva. In it, she warned me not to try to stop her, that everything she was doing was part of a larger plan, and that I had no idea what was at stake. The evidence. Rosalva's letter left me in a state of paralysis. Her words weren't just unsettling, they revealed something deeper. She knew exactly what she was doing and was fully aware of her actions. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about how I had arrived at this point. My daughter, that child to whom I had dedicated my life, seemed to be a completely different being from the one I had imagined raising. The following days were a whirlwind of fear and doubt. The police continued investigating Alfredo's death, but answers were scarce. Meanwhile, the town remained immersed in a climate of paranoia. Rumors about the presence of evil lurking in San Vicente spread like wildfire. Some neighbors began pointing at our family. The looks of distrust on the street were evident, but no one dared say it directly. One day while cleaning the house, I found something that made me feel everything was falling apart even more. Behind a loose board in Rosalva's closet, there was a hiding place. Inside, I found small jars labeled with symbols I didn't understand, dark-colored candles, and pieces of paper with illegible writing, as if they were part of an ancient language. Among the objects, there was also a small diary. When I opened it, I discovered a series of detailed notes describing steps of rituals and experiments that clearly involved people. My first impulse was to destroy everything, but something inside me stopped me. I needed to understand how far Rosalva had gone. The diary notes spoke of something greater, something related to control and transcendence. They also mentioned names I recognized, those of the missing people, and finally Alfredo's. Everything was there, written with the coldness and precision that only someone completely devoid of empathy could have. I couldn't stay silent any longer. I called Dr. Herrera and asked her to come to San Vicente immediately. When she arrived, I showed her everything I had found. Her face reflected a mixture of horror and determination. "This confirms our suspicions," she told me. "But we can't handle this alone. We need the intervention of authorities." Dr. Herrera contacted the local police, who arrived the next day to examine the evidence. However, when they tried to interrogate Rosalva, she received them with disconcerting calm. She denied everything, and her attitude was so convincing that the officers seemed to doubt my words. "She's just a teenager," they said. "We can't arrest her without solid proof." That same night, Rosalva confronted me about my betrayal. She looked at me with an intensity that made me tremble. "Why, Mom?" she asked me. But it wasn't a question of pain or confusion. It was a warning. Her voice was soft, but her words were loaded with implicit threat. She didn't respond to my attempts to explain myself. Instead, she disappeared into her room and didn't come out until the next day. The disappearance. In the following weeks, Rosalva seemed calmer, as if the incident with the police hadn't affected her in the slightest. However, I knew something was coming. Her behavior was too calculated, and her attitude toward me had changed. She no longer tried to hide her contempt. She had become more direct, making it clear that she didn't need me or anyone else. One day while working at the restaurant, I received a call from Dr. Herrera. She told me that one of her colleagues, specialized in rituals and symbology, had analyzed the notes and objects found in the house. According to her, many of the symbols corresponded to extremely dangerous occult practices linked to ancient cults that sought power through human sacrifice. Dr. Herrera's words left me frozen. "Your daughter isn't playing games, Guadalupe. This is real. And if we don't stop her, it could be too late." That night when I returned home, I felt a change in the atmosphere. It was as if the air were heavier, charged with a dark energy. Rosalva wasn't home, and her room was completely empty. All her things had disappeared, including the diary and the jars. On the dining room table, I found a note. It only said, "Don't try to find me." The note Rosalva left was a devastating blow. "Don't try to find me," she had written, as if she knew my first reaction would be to go out looking for her. But how could I look for her? Rosalva had always been meticulous, and now more than ever, she seemed to have planned every detail of her disappearance. She left no traces, and the authorities, after searching the house, concluded that she had left of her own free will. For them, the case didn't warrant further intervention. Weeks passed without news of her. San Vicente, although still shaken by the crimes, tried to return to normal. However, for me, life had lost any sense of order. Each day was charged with uncertainty and fear. I installed new locks, bars on the windows, and even cameras outside the house. The silence of the night had become my worst enemy. Every noise made me think Rosalva was back, ready to complete what she had started. The hidden map. One day while organizing the papers the police had left after investigating, I found something they had overlooked. A folded sheet in one of the books Rosalva had hidden in her room. It was a rudimentary but clear map pointing to a specific area in the forest south of town, near an old abandoned cemetery. Although fear paralyzed me, I knew I had to find out what it meant. I took a flashlight and headed to the place as evening fell. The forest was completely silent, and each step I took seemed to echo more than normal. Finally, I arrived at a small ruined cabin that I didn't remember having seen before. Upon entering, I found myself in a dark, foul-smelling space. In the center, there was a circle drawn on the floor surrounded by extinguished candles and wooden figures carved that reminded me of those I had seen on her altar at home. There was also a notebook that I immediately recognized as the diary that had disappeared from her room. When I opened it, I discovered something that chilled me to the bone. Rosalva had been planning something much bigger than I had imagined. The pages were full of notes about a ritual that, according to her words, would give her total control. There were detailed descriptions of the steps to follow, ingredients collected, and marked dates. Among the ingredients, she mentioned stolen life, which made it clear that human sacrifices were an essential part of the process. I returned home and took the diary to Dr. Herrera, who was equally horrified reading it. "This isn't just the game of a disturbed teenager," she told me. "Rosalva is following practices that have roots in ancestral cults. If she manages to complete this, we don't know what could happen." Her warning was clear: Rosalva must be found and stopped. Authorities intensified searches, but every clue they found ended up being a dead end. Meanwhile, I felt something dark beginning to envelop my life. Small incidents occurred at home, objects disappearing and reappearing in strange places, shadows that seemed to move in corners, and a constant sensation of being watched. Although I tried to stay strong, fear was consuming me. The anonymous call. A month later, I received an anonymous call in the middle of the night. A distorted voice gave me an address on the outskirts of San Vicente, along with a warning: "If you want answers, go alone." Although I knew it could be a trap, my desperation to know what had become of Rosalva pushed me to go. I arrived at the place at dawn. It was an old abandoned warehouse, covered in graffiti and with the air of having been forgotten for years. Upon entering, the cold was palpable, as if the place were impregnated with an evil energy. In the center of the warehouse, there was a table, and on it, a series of photos. They were images of Rosalva in different places, as if someone had been watching her. Among the photos, there was a letter addressed to me. The letter was direct and disturbing. Rosalva explained that her disappearance wasn't an escape but another stage of her plan. "Everything I've done for a reason," she wrote. "Life is limited and weak, but I have found a way to transcend. Don't worry about me, Mom. Don't look for me. We won't see each other again." After reading the letter, my mind flooded with questions. What did transcend mean? What was it that Rosalva sought to achieve? Her tone wasn't that of someone lost or desperate. It was cold, calculating, as if she had already crossed a line that I couldn't comprehend. I kept the letter and photos and returned home, feeling more lost than ever. Dr. Herrera urged me to remain calm and wait for authorities to find Rosalva. But I knew I couldn't sit idly by. I returned to the diary I had found in the forest cabin, reading each page carefully, looking for something that could give me answers. That's when I noticed a detail I had overlooked. A date marked with a star, accompanied by the word culmination. The date was only 3 days away. I didn't know what that culmination implied, but I was sure it was key to Rosalva's plan. I decided to go to the location marked on the diary map once more, this time more carefully. Fear wouldn't stop me. The final ritual. I arrived at the forest just before sunset, and this time I wasn't alone. I brought with me a group of neighbors who, although skeptical, agreed to help me. When we reached the place, we found evidence that someone had been there recently. Melted candles, ashes on the ground, and a strange smell of burnt herbs permeated the air. In the center of the space, there was an inscription carved into a stone. Although we didn't understand its meaning, the presence of that symbol confirmed that Rosalva was still active and that this place held an important purpose for her. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at the dining table, reviewing every detail of the diary, every clue Rosalva had left, searching for something that could stop what was about to happen. I knew I couldn't face this alone, but I also knew the police wouldn't act without more solid proof. I had only one option. Confront Rosalva if I could find her. The day marked in the diary arrived with a strange atmosphere in the town. The sky was covered with dark clouds, and a feeling of heaviness seemed to envelop everything. I received another anonymous call, this time giving me precise instructions to reach a place that wasn't on any map, an old abandoned church on the outskirts of San Vicente. I arrived at the place at nightfall. The church, although in ruins, still preserved part of its structure. Inside, the silence was sepulchral, broken only by the echo of my steps. At the altar, I found Rosalva. She was standing with a calmness that disconcerted me. She showed no surprise at seeing me. She seemed to have been waiting for me. At that moment, everything I had wanted to say to her evaporated. Rosalva stared at me with that cold expression that so terrified me and began to speak. She explained to me that everything she had done, every sacrifice, every step, was part of a ritual to achieve something beyond human understanding. The world is full of limits, she said. But I have surpassed them. I tried to convince her to stop, to come back with me, but her words were unmovable. You never understood who I really am, Mom. But that's okay. Now you'll see. Before I could react, Rosalva lit several candles arranged in a circle around the altar. The air became dense, and a strange energy began to fill the space. I don't clearly remember what happened after that. Everything became a whirlwind of lights, shadows, and sounds that seemed to come from another world. The last thing I saw was Rosalva standing in the center of the circle, with an expression of triumph on her face. Aftermath. When I woke up, I was outside the church, surrounded by the neighbors who had come with me. The church was empty, and Rosalva had completely disappeared. Although the police searched the surrounding area, they found no trace of her or the objects she had used in the ritual. Today, years later, I still live in San Vicente. The church was demolished, and the forest that surrounded it became a place no one dares to go. Rosalva never returned, but sometimes I feel her presence like a shadow hiding in the corners of my mind. I don't know if she achieved what she was looking for, but a part of me fears that she is still near, waiting for the right moment to return. I thank God for still being alive, but every day I carry with me the weight of uncertainty and fear. Some nights when the wind blows strong, I think I hear her voice calling me from some unknown place. And although I try to convince myself that it's just imagination, I know that the darkness Rosalva brought into my life will never completely go away.